Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining this Gutman Library Book Talk for Critical AI in K-12 Classrooms, a practical guide for cultivating justice and joy. I'm Karen Adler, an acquisitions editor here at Harvard Education Press, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Stephanie Smith Budhai and Dr. Marie K. Heath, the authors of this brilliant book, which Harvard Education Press had the pleasure of publishing last month. Stephanie Smith Budhai is an associate professor in the Educational Technology program at the University of Delaware and is the recipient of the Excellence in Teacher Education Award from the International Society for Technology and Education. Currently, she is the associate chair of the Technology Council for the Society of Information Technology and Teacher Education, an advisory board member for the Association for Educational Communications and Technologies, ACT, Center for Excellence for Publishing Editorial Advisory Board for Tech and Learning. And she is the past president for the International Society for Technology in Education, awardee for the Excellence in Teacher Education, and has been invited to speak for educators across the globe. That's many awards and acclamations. She has published dozens of practitioner articles for Tech and Learning, as well as 8 books on teaching, technology, and education. Dr. Marie K. Heath is an associate professor for learning design and technology and a faculty fellow at the Center for Leadership and Social Justice Education at Loyola University, Maryland. She is the co-editor of the Social Studies Education section for Contemporary Issues in Technology and Teacher Education and co-founder of the Civics of Technology project, as well as the author of many peer-reviewed articles on technology, change, and education. She is a former high school social studies teacher from Baltimore County Public Schools. It's also my honor to introduce our moderator today for the book talk. Please welcome Dr. Punya Mishra, the Director of Innovative Learning Futures at the Learning Engineering Institute and professor at the Mary Lou Fulton College of Teaching and Learning Innovation at Arizona State University. He is internationally recognized for his work in education technology, the role of creativity and aesthetics in learning, and the application of collaborative, design-based approaches to educational innovation. The editor of 5 books, he is the recipient of AECT's David H. Johansen Excellence in Research Award with over 67,000 citations of his research, and he is ranked among the top 2% of scientists worldwide. And let me thank Gutman Library for hosting this book talk. We will listen to the conversation among the 3 of you and then reserve the last 15 minutes or so for a Q&A from our viewers. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Punya, Stephanie, and Marie.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for that wonderful introduction. I know we are tight on time. We have over almost 90 people, so I'm going to jump right in. Marie, Stephanie, it's great to have this conversation with both of you. We go back a long way, and it's wonderful to be a part of this. So, we are focusing on your book, Critical AI in K-12 Classrooms, a practical guide for cultivating justice and joy. And in this book, you focus on this complicated intersection of AI, education, and justice. So, first question, why this book and why now?
Right. Thank you so much, Punya. So, it's no surprise that AI is just the topic of everybody's discussion, probably, especially in education and ed tech. Um, Teachers are bombarded right now on policy and practice guidelines on what to do and how to use AI. Some teachers don't even know a lot about AI. They didn't study computational thinking or computer science education and really don't have the time to sort of figure it out. So we knew that we were going to write a book about AI, but we knew it had to be different than the other books that were out there. We sort of did a scan, and most of the books seem to be focused on how to use AI, or you can use AI to be efficient. There are some books that talk about ethics and responsible AI, but that's different than critical AI, and really I'm taking that lens to it. So we wrote this book right now at a time where teachers need resources, guidance, and we wrote it as a practical guide on AI, but also through a critical lens that they could use not only in their own teaching, but to help students as well bring that criticality. So to really address the dearth of available texts out there for teachers.
Okay. So, you mentioned already a little bit that this is targeted at K-12 educators. But Marie, maybe you can expand on that a little bit as to how you see this book being useful to them, and what the critical lens brings to that conversation, which I think, Stephanie, you sort of described in your first response.
Yeah, thank you, Punya, and thanks everyone who is here, and Punya, thanks for moderating. The book is for teachers and also for potentially folks who may be teacher educators to use in classrooms with future teachers or in-service teachers. What we've found is when we're working with folks and doing, say, professional development with teachers, a lot of times, sort of to Stephanie's point, people are feeling like you AI is here. It has to be in your classroom. You need to use it in certain ways, but there hasn't a lot of times sort of larger conversations about like what is AI and situating it in longer histories. What is generative AI and how is it different from other types of artificial intelligences? How it is design, the infrastructure, the design, all of that. We wanted to have a sort of front end of the book, just like situating the AI in those ideas and in its historical context. And then we wanted to crosswalk it with pedagogies that are really powerful to us and we think are important pedagogies in teaching. So culturally sustaining, abolitionist and fugitive pedagogy. So we wanted something that allowed teachers to engage in powerful justice-centered work and walk that with AI.
Thank you. And what really stood out for me as I'm reading the book, and I should add that I was invited to write the preface for it, so that was a pleasure as well, is very often these conversations around AI and technology in general, but I think with this moment in AI in particular is the ahistorical nature of it. These technologies are often sort of described as ab initio, like boom, here it is. But I think what you do very wonderfully in the book that you spoke to is contextualize it within this history, that there are different kinds of AI, generative AI being one of them with its own unique propensities, but also situated within sort of this pedagogical sort of values that we bring to the work that we do. So I think that really stood out for me as something being critical. But the thing that really I loved about the title of the book were the use of three words, which I would love for one or both of you to speak to, which is this combination of the word justice, which is something that we often talk about in education and as a primary key value, but it is then juxtaposed with the word joy, which I thought was something that one doesn't often see in a book on AI and teaching and so on, is the word joy. And then this word cultivate, which has this automatic sort of the metaphors that it brings in of nurture and gardening and so on. So maybe you can speak to why that title and how does it then allow us to approach what you were talking about in a different way. Whoever wants to jump in there.
Sure, I'll start, and then
Okay.
I have some things to add. Oh yeah, we spent a lot of time on the title and on those descriptors because it's important. And as I previously mentioned, there are a lot of options out there on AI in education. So we wanted to make sure that when readers read the cover of our book, that they know that they had a good understanding of what the content might be. I also see a symbiotic relationship between justice and joy. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of times when people hear justice, particularly in our current political context, it's seen as a negative connotation. But justice is a good thing. Working towards just futures for students is a good thing, and it should bring joy. We also see education. We understand the history of education, and education wasn't built on justice. Just on Friday, I think was the 65th anniversary of Ruby Bridges, and I'd heard a special talk about that. But so educational structures weren't built on justice, but that doesn't mean that as teachers, we can't provide spaces for our students that are joyful, right? So
Mhm.
we're looking at AI, which unfortunately is built on injustice. And we recognize that, and in the book, we're working towards how can we actually switch that around? How can we make sure that justice is embedded in AI, but also brings just not a temporary pleasure, but a lasting enjoyment for students and teachers, where if they do engage with those technologies, they won't be harmed, but they'll also really feel joy. And then how do you do that? From the other word, you cultivate it, right? Like this isn't
Hmm.
something that happens overnight.
Hmm.
It seems like AI has just got here, but it's been around for decades, and we go back in the book and we talk about that history. But in November 2022 is really when generative AI became available to most people. And that was 3 years ago, right? So we're still trying to cultivate. So cultivation, to me is it's a longer process. It's a slower process, but it can be a lasting process. So that's sort of how we got the justice and joy and cultivating it through it.
Yeah, and
Thank
if
you,
I could
Brady.
just
Would
pick up a
Yeah,
thread,
please.
yeah, that Stephanie laid down, which was the idea. I mean, one of the things that Stephanie and I have talked about is that AI itself is not ethical nor just, right? In its design, right? It's not. And so what does that mean to bring a technology which is grounded in unjust ways that it is created into schools, which are historically also unjust spaces. And so and we realized, that injustice has happened for a long time in schools, and powerful educators like Carter G. Woodson have been figuring out how to educate for justice. There are examples, right? And there are also, and the reason joy is in there is because often I think we think about struggle, right? And struggle is part of justice, but existing and existing joyfully is also part of justice. So if it
Mhm.
and being affirmed and getting to be who you are in your full self is also part of that. And so how do we work with a technology which is not designed to do that right at its heart? What are ways that we can work to reimagine it so that it can be?
I have to say I love that framing. And Marie, you and I have talked about the word joy in other contexts as well. And education, if it is not joyful, then what is it, right? And if the goals are not towards justice, what's why? Stephanie, I love that point about that you made about cultivation. This is not going to happen overnight. There are histories here that need unpacking. There are stories that need to be told. There are ways of approaching it, but it's that combination to me that I think in the title really stood out for me. So, which is why I sort of led with that question here. So, I'm going to move on a little bit. So, you referred to creating a home place, a culture, mentioned culturally relevant, responsive, and sustaining pedagogies for inclusive AI. There's a lot of sort of words here carrying a lot of weight. So maybe talk a little bit about why that kind of a framing is important for when we think about AI. Because if you look at the rhetoric of AI, it's the inevitably rhetoric. It is the this is here to stay, which is why we have to deal with it. All of that stuff going on. You're going to fall behind. We have heard that with every technology that's come along, and what does one gain from the framing that you have sort of put on it? Because I think there's a lot there that all of us as educators need to be thinking about.
Sure, yeah. I think we intentionally leaned into historical content and theories and practices from ancestors who went through the world in a time where they had no voice, where they felt like they didn't matter, where they were murdered, where they were harmed, right? So we leaned into those type of teachings to bring into our work here. And one of those was Bell Hook's concept of home place. And as we talked about, this justice and joy, and we spend time in the first few chapters talking about the harms of AI, right? Technology has always come in schools, and yes, it has always been this. Teachers are going to lose jobs. It is going to take over everything, but AI is a little bit different, right? Because it
Mhm.
is, and especially generative AI, it is a lot more harmful than a smart board, which people were scared about, or a one-to-one program. So we as we're building these recommendations, these guidelines and resources for teachers, we started with the environment, and the classrooms need to be safe. So if we already know that schools are not built on equity. How can we support teachers and at least making sure that classrooms are? So a home place is a place where you can you can just not forget about what's going on out there in the world, but you can sort of, take your hat off, take your wig off, take whatever off and say, "Whew, I am in a safe place. I'm a place to ask questions. I'm in a place to
Love that.
reflect. I'm in a place to resist, right? So we want classrooms to be home places, right? Sites of nurturing, sites of affirmation, and if needed, sites of resistance. And we looked into, and Maria mentioned this earlier, we wanted to find pedagogies because this is a book for educators, right? And we didn't want this book just to be, this is what AI is and it's harmful, but so what? No, we wanted to give practical guides, and we do that through our teaching, we do that through pedagogy. So we start with culturally relevant, responsive, and sustaining pedagogies before we go into fugitive and abolitionist, and really building on the work of Ladson Billings, Gay, and Paris, and situating those concepts into this home place so that, as I mentioned, students can feel like they have a voice in this. They can ask questions, and we have a lot of different activities and sort of activities for teachers to use to take students there. So,
So I love the home place word, because again, that's again, I think coming back circle to something we talked about earlier, this idea of joy, because that's, home is where you can, like you said, I mean, let your head, metaphorically in my case, because I have none to let down. But it is also a place of joy, and it's also a place of questioning, of curiosity, and so on. And so something, Stephanie, you mentioned, which is about fugitive and abolitionist pedagogy. So Marie, would you like to expand on that a little bit about sort of building on what Stephanie just spoke about earlier?
Yeah, and I think the site of home place is also aligned with that metaphor of cultivation, right? Because you can cultivate in this safe space identity, sense of self, and a desire for change and working towards justice and plans for how that will come about. And so we drew from abolitionist pedagogies, which Jarvis Gibbons, who is at Harvard, who writes about in Carter G. Woodson's work, the ways that Black teachers have long taught truth in spaces that were oppressive or were not allowed, where that was not allowed to happen. And so what that might look like with in spaces, particularly right now in this political moment where certain words, you might not be allowed to use the word equity, or you might not be permitted in your classroom to talk about race. So what does that mean to still teach towards justice in spaces where that is not permitted? And so we turn to folks who have done that for a really long time because of the power of education and what that might look like. And then abolitionist pedagogy, or sorry, abolitionist pedagogies, we draw on Bettina Love a lot, who talks about the ways that you freedom dream, which is also joy, right? What does that look like then to live in a new world that you build together? And so what might that look like to use with and reimagining the ways that AI is both in your classroom and in your life? So part of this is that we hope that teachers and students don't just think about ways that AI might influence the way you design a lesson or teach a class, but rather that you think broadly about this technology, which is, I do not want to carry water for tech billionaires and say is here to stay, but it is here. It does exist. It is influencing our current reality and this moment. And so, how do we teach about that and freedom dream the ways that we want it to be in our lives, rather than the ways we're told it should be in our lives?
it was
I
nice
love.
about fugitive pedagogies too, is that they're quiet acts, right? They can be
Uh-huh.
done in hiding, right? So looking at all the inequity that's baked into AI, teachers can sort of address it while teaching about AI when there people who were maybe against it might not even know that it's being done. So that's an important piece, and they might not, teachers might not have been familiar with that, but I think that it's to use a Marie word, clever in a sense.
There were many
Yeah,
times where Stephanie had to edit out my use of clever because it
clever. Yeah,
was
I
a
get
word I
that.
leaned on too often.
Yep, yep, I hear you. I hear you. So I'm going to get to the process of collaboration in a little bit because that really intrigues me. Just writing solo, sometimes I get have conversations in my head with myself and I disagree with myself. What does it mean for people to collaborate and write is something I want to learn more about. But before I go there, I want to sort of lean a little bit into the Sojourner Truth example, and I'm going to massacre this phrase. So is it cartes de vistes? Is that sort of ballpark where it is, to share abolitionist ideas. And this is great quote that Marie, you told me at one point, and I see it in the book as well. This idea of selling the shadow to support the substance. I just think that's such a, so there is a story behind it, I know. And then how does that play out in the ideas in the book itself?
Yeah, that I carte de visite. So
Okay, see,
yeah,
yeah, it's okay.
is
Indian
is
accent
the
plus
word.
French with no knowledge of French, that's a disaster in the
But
making.
they were these like when photography was invented, shortly thereafter, there were these like you would get pictures and they were I don't want to say trading cards, but they were like you could get little versions of pictures of famous people that you might have something on it, or and so it became just a popular way to play with the technology of photography. So the technology of photography is designed to literally capture light, right? And when it was designed by white inventors to capture white faces and white culture. And so this is a time when Stephanie did allow me to use both clever and powerful, two of my favorite words, which is that Sojourner Truth in pre-Civil War, she both as a Black woman, stepped into a space that was not made for her and claimed it as her own, dressed in middle class clothing that a woman would wear of the time, and saying, "Look at me." And she was famous in her time. And so she sold these to raise money for abolition. And it was so meta too, because she used the phrase, I sell the shadow to support the substance. And the substance in that case was literally abolition. And so that to me is such a really powerful example and metaphor for the ways that we can reimagine technology towards just ends. And we pick that up and sort of pick up the longer tail of the ways that cameras for a long time were never amended. The technology was not amended to capture darker skin, and the ways that that then impacted our phones and surveillance technology. And so it is just, I think, like a really interesting historical thread and also example for us in our book.
In a more recent issue that we also in that same section explained to readers in 2021, Google actually, they were so proud that their technology could finally see dark faces. But the way that they went about getting that technology to work was very harmful and unethical. So what they did was they manipulated unhoused individuals in Atlanta and took their pictures without their permission to train on dark faces. So we sort of, another memory word, juxtapose the Sojourner with how the powerful example of what Sojourner Truth did with the horrible acts that Google did, just to show just the power of the camera and technology and how it can be used for good and evil.
Well, I think you wanted to say cleverly juxtaposed.
Yes, clever,
That
yes.
would be that should be the way to think about it. So thank you for that. And there's a question here that's been raised by Annie. I'm going to keep to the first name because I want to mispronounce the last name. And I think this is a theme that's come up sort of implicitly through this conversation, this example, Stephanie, that you gave being like a very concrete example of that. And Annie's asking, could you please explain a little more your framing of AI as being inherently unjust, right? And I'm reminded of Marie, the work that, Melissa Warr and she has done, showing that even the changing like one word in a student essay can elicit which you cite in the book, elicit very different responses from these large language models in a world where we are increasingly being pushed to use these for the sake of efficiency and so on. And the injustice goes from how the training data was collected, and who's training the human reinforcement stuff, where that's happening, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot to unpack here, but I think that's a great question. So either of you jump in and then you can add to that. I think that'll be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a 24-hour probably talk on this, but so many examples, even just connected with the Google example. Police have used AI unjustly to misidentify darker faces, which leads to a disproportionate number of Black and brown individuals who are falsely arrested. As you mentioned, Punya, the outputs are inherently biased. We actually did an activity when we were writing, and we asked ChatGPT to recommend 10 books that they would recommend for white high school boys. And there were some really good recommendations. All of the books were about like coming of age stories of friendship and love and sort of like maturity. And then we asked the same question, but we replaced white with Black. So we asked ChatGPT to recommend 10 books that they would recommend for Black high school boys. And most of the books were about murder and poverty and just harm. Like it was just horrible just to see the dichotomy between the two outputs. And if students and even teachers, if they don't understand that the outputs come from biased data, a Black student might say, "Oh, this is the book that's recommended for me. This is what I should be doing," instead of books that are more uplifting and hopeful. There's predictive pricing examples where if you live in a certain zip code, you have to pay a higher price just because the AI manipulates that. Marie, you have some examples. I mean, you probably have a lot, but so many examples.
Yes, there are, like Stephanie said, I'll be brief because there are so many. But Stephanie and Punya have talked about great examples on the output end, right? Like the ways that your your prompt may be answered in a way that is biased, but the that comes because the data that first feeds large language models, right, comes from essentially the whole of the internet, which has a lot of majoritarian views built into it, particularly from the global north, right? So there's like an emphasis on language and even the idioms that we use in our language, right? And the ways that we see the world come out in our language. So the ways that and I hesitate to use the word thinks, but the ways that like what its training data is of a particular viewpoint, right? I always say it's also a conservative technology because it's trained on the past. And so it looks for patterns from the past to tell us the future, to generate ideas for the future, which I think is inherently conservative in the ways that it, again, pattern matches or thinks. There's also examples of just extractive practices, both for gathering data, for gathering the hardware, the material that makes up AI, who is harmed through that, and then even asking folks like in Kenya to clean data, right? So AI doesn't clean its own data. There's just horrible psychologically damaging images and words that we don't see when we use it because a company has paid pennies on the dollar to someone to clean that out already, which is just pays a enormous psychological price. So there's plenty more both in our book and then if I'll at the end recommend more books as well.
Perfect. Thank you. No, I think that again, I think this is what I think is this tension with this technology at this moment, but that's true of everything that we use. There is, just by existing on this planet, we have a carbon footprint. We are complicit in the ways of, lots of sort of practices and we have to negotiate. And what I love about the book is that it says, yes, let's recognize these facts, let's understand the history, the technology, and so on. But that doesn't mean that you run away from it, you put your head in the sand, but let's get a sort of a more critical sort of way of thinking about it so that we can move forward. So I really, really love that sort of framing. Questions are coming in. We'll take these questions a little later. But I really am genuinely curious about how this process of collaboration work, because you are two different people, you might align on certain ideas. How does that process work of where you are writing a draft and you agree, disagree? How do you negotiate those? Because at the end of the day, there is this authorial voice, which is this weird amalgam of the both of you. And I wonder how that sort of process played out in the writing of this book and what differences there were and how you negotiated and figured that out.
Yeah, I think the writing process with Marie was joy in itself, at least for me. And when you work with Marie closely, so you've probably felt that joy as well. Marie and I this is the first time that we've written a book together. We had worked on some other projects together, but we had the pleasure of being inaugural co-chairs for the Culture and Climate Committee for SITE, which is the Society for Information Technology and Teacher Education. And in our work there, we were charged with being critical friends to SITE and asking critical questions and that could shape policy and practices and research to make sure that SITE was a place for everyone. And from my work with Marie there, I knew that she was a good partner, a good thought partner, a good, obviously, she's a brilliant scholar and professor. So that was already there. So it was pretty easy. I mean, I think our biggest hurdles was Marie not wanting me to use the word leverage so much. It did me not wanting Marie to use clever so much. But it was a good experience. I'm really organized. Not that Marie isn't organized, but I'm I'm really organized. Marie's more go with the flow, but organized as well. So I think they kind of like work together. We, kind of like teased out specific plans on what we needed to do, but also we wrote together a lot. So that was really nice because when you're writing together, you can sort of in the moment shift and ask questions and make edits versus if we just would have said, okay, you write half the book and you write half the book and bring it together. So I think writing together made it seem more like one voice in a seamless
Mm.
experience. But when you're writing with anyone, and this was my ninth book that I've written, and I've only written two by myself. So I've written with a lot of people before. So I've had experience with that. So that really helped this process out. We also had like an amazing editor, Karen, who's on there, who just was just with us through every word, and just incredible feedback. So Marie, I don't know how your experience was, but I thought that we did a really good job being able to plan, come together, and make sure that both of our wants and desires sort of came out of the book. And I just also want to say that I come from a special education background, and so as a special education teacher working with a general education teacher in like a co-taught classroom, I was always taught that, it's better to have two, right? It's You both can bring your strengths to the project, to the teaching when you're writing a lesson, when you're writing an IEP for a student, and the student sort of gets the best of you, right? And I felt
Mhm.
like that's what happened with the book. The book got the best of both of us in the different
Nice.
places that the book needed to have it. So we were able to sort of bring our strengths and our disciplines and experiences to create this wonderful book. So
I was hoping for stories of struggle and fighting, and so Marie, help me out. No, I'm kidding. Any thoughts, Marie, you want to add?
I just want to say that that was incredibly kind, Stephanie. That was really nice to hear, and I appreciate it. I'm like collaborative to a fault. My writing style is I would love to be like together in the same document, and I'm up here and you're there, and then so it is. And I recognize that that is not everyone's style, but my favorite way to be with people is thinking through a problem together. And so I'm really appreciative, Stephanie, that you invited me into this project and like we're willing to do that. And also had the experience, brought the wisdom of having written books before because I have not. Um, and and also like I've never met a go-getter like Stephanie. It's just like, we're gonna do this and we're gonna have it done by this date. And I was like, are you sure? She's like, yeah, you can do that. You can definitely do this, Marie. So I was like, okay,
All
I guess
right.
I can.
Okay, cool. So this is a good transition to coming back to the topic. This was more of a personal curiosity question, honestly. All the viewers are like, why is Punya asking this? But now you are writing this book at a particular moment in time, which is, this is 2025, book just came out. So which means most of it was actually written 6 months ago, 5 months ago. And one of the things that with this tech in particular and tech in general, but with I think AI in particular, it is just moving fast. You think you know what it is today, tomorrow some little thing comes out. I mean, and now we have these AI browsers which can go into your online course and complete assignments for you, and all that kind of stuff that's happening. So, are you concerned in any way that the book or the ideas in the book will get out of date in some way, right? And then, given how fast this thing is moving, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think that was something that we thought about while we were writing this, certainly, because anytime you write a book about technology, you know that even by the time it's published, the technology will have changed. And I would say that although the book is certainly about generative AI specifically, um, it is about responding to uh, more teaching both with and about the technology, right? And grounding ourselves in a particular value orientation, which is situated in the pedagogies we choose, the ways that we make AI a point of inquiry for students and for teachers. Uh, as the technology changes, it will still be a point of inquiry, and you can still use the ways that we are framing this to inquire about it with your students. Because, and I think Punya, you and I have written about this as well, that teaching with the technology is important. This particular technology is changing our shared understanding of reality. It has implications for democracy. And so being able to think about what the world will be like that you are inhabiting and how you want the world to be like, those questions will endure. And so we
Mm.
hope that we've written something that making it a point of inquiry and using powerful pedagogy, I just used powerful,
That was
clever,
clever.
powerful pedagogy, it was clever, will allow the book to endure even as the technology changes.
Stephanie, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think this was a question that we considered really early on, especially when you're writing any type of ed tech book. You want to make sure that it's still relevant when you publish it. And I think by focusing on pedagogies and not specific tools, although we do mention
Sure.
tools and examples, the book should be timeless. It should be able to stand the test of time. And like I said earlier, 3 years ago has already passed, and school districts still don't have policies, right? I think
Mhm.
we're going to be talking about AI policies. I think we're going to be talking about AI for a long time.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the book will stay relevant for all the reasons Marie said, and just because this is going to be a long journey.
Sure. And one of the things that you write about in the book is this sort of Neil Postman's 5 questions, which I think was a talk he gave in like 89. So when you think about that, that's like pre-internet, like pre-web or early internet, pre-web for sure. And those 5 questions still remain relevant. And so I think that's something that really stood out for me in the book is that you can take the particular technology out, but the broader themes, the values, and you use the word, Marie, the word enduring, those kinds of questions, like locating it in history, locating it in this broader narrative. I think that's what gives the book legs, honestly, because the tech is an instance of, and there will be other ones that come along, but I think those things will still stand true. And that was what really stood out for me in the book was that it is about a particular technology, but it's asking bigger, deeper questions, which will stand the test of time. So congratulations on that. I'm looking at the time here. We'd like to go into some Q&A, but before that, um, we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges about the injustice that's inherent in this tech and so on, but the title of your book has the word joy in it. And so the question I have for each of you before we go into audience Q&A is, what gives you hope as you look ahead? What kind of uh, things make you feel good about not just this technology, but education broadly, and so on. Either of you can start first.
Yeah, I think the fact that we're having this conversation right now and over 300 people registered for this conversation means that people are interested in talking about critical AI. And if people are interested in talking about it, that means that people are going to then do the work. In the book, we at the end we have a chapter called Towards Just AI, and we want all teachers to to lean into that, and we provide just specific actions that teachers can take, so personal, professional, pedagogical, and participatory actions that they can take to continue this work. So I feel hopeful. I feel like the field is recognizing the impacts of AI may have been a little bit more than they may have thought. And I see these types of conversations and people are connecting things. I mean, even I actually was just reading an article that you wrote, Punya, 2 years ago, where you connected your seminal TPAC model with like in the age of generative AI and in the research you were talking about the different knowledge that teachers need to have in order to effectively use Gen AI. So I think even that, like going to seminal pieces like TPAC and other models and how we went to, culturally relevant and responsive and sustaining pedagogies and fugitive and abolitionist pedagogies and home place and making good trouble and connecting it
Mhm.
to what's going on now, that makes me feel good. And I feel like it's going to continue.
Yeah. And you want to, first of all, I was hoping this would be one conversation where the TPAC model would not be brought up. So thank you for not, no, thank you for that. It's kind of sad. You're known for building a Venn diagram. It's very depressing, but that's okay. I'll take it. I'll take it. But I think the idea that there are these deeper questions that we can ask, and that there can be ups and downs. And that's another thing that history tells us, right? That there are moments which seem problematic or difficult, but there is always, if you hold on to some of these deeper values, it works out in the end. I think I hear that both in the book and in the conversation. Marie, your thoughts?
Yes, I'll be quick because I know we're going to go to audience questions, and I'll say that mine is I love teaching, and students and teachers bring me joy. Like that is hopeful to me. Being in schools is hopeful to me. Seeing teachers and students asking questions, thinking about students like Ruby Bridges, who is an incredible historic example, right? And thinking about our students today who continue to insist on living their fullest lives, like visible, full, powerful lives, even in a place that may not be making space for that, is to me really joyful and wonderful. So I'll send it over to Karen now, I think, for questions.
Okay, perfect. All right, Karen's here.
Yes, well,
We
thank you
have a few
all.
questions. Please jump in.
Thank you all for such an engaging conversation so far. And well, we're leaving the last 15 minutes or so for questions. Please feel free to chime in with your questions. And let's start with a question here from someone from Ipswich Public Schools who asks, many people in my school district are understandably concerned about using AI because of its impact on the environment. How would you respond to this, especially in the context of using AI for justice and joy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We do mention environmental impacts in the book, and particularly towards the beginning when we're talking about the harms of AI. A lot of times I feel like the environment gets left behind because people are mostly concerned with maybe just bias. That's probably like the biggest thing I've heard. So we do that. I actually created a course, and if you email me, I can talk to you offline. It's called Societal Implications of AI, and we go in more deeply with that. There are different things that you can do. There's a faculty footprint calculator where you could have your faculty sort of calculate how much their uses of AI and lesson planning and video consumption, like content, lectures, anything is having on the environment. Um, but people should know what's going on with the environment. They should know about data centers and how much energy and water is being used. And we do include that in the book because it's a critical question to ask. And I think once you realize the connection between AI use and the environment. It's not that you're going to not use AI anymore, but you might be a little bit more intentional about how you use AI. And do I actually need to use it for this thing that I was not using it before? So I don't know if that answers your question. It's difficult when you can't have a conversation with the person asking the question, but that is something that we talk about in the book, and it's something that is important and that we hope educators are considering.
Yeah, and I would just add making it again a site of inquiry, right? Because it's a two things. The environmental impacts of AI are not divorced from its inequitable, they are disproportionate across groups. And so there are communities that are more likely to be harmed by the environmental impacts than other communities. And also investigating in your own community and making that a site, whether you're sort of in a secondary school and you can put it through a disciplinary lens, or whether you're at a K-12 school and you want to think about it holistically and think about it in terms of communities. There's all kinds of ways to ask questions about that with your students.
And while you're teaching students about AI, right? So you can teach students about AI. You can teach them what a data center is, how data centers are situated in certain communities while they're investigating their own community, and then have them reflect and think about what does that mean for their community, for their family, for their school and their education. So you can and these are some of the activities that we actually have in the book. So you can make it a teaching experience while also learning about it.
That's terrific. Thank you both. Moving on to the next question, and you touched on this a little bit in some of the historical examples you drew upon, but could you share some of your thoughts on AI bias versus human bias? And can you talk about how, while AI has bias, we humans are also implicitly biased, and whether there's a analysis or comparison there, and if you could touch on this.
I really like this question because I often, folks say, well, but people are biased too, right? And that is correct, right? We all breathe in the air that we are living in and swimming in the water we're swimming in, and we're part of social systems that are disproportionate and unequal. The difference for me is that we have long researched how to think about bias in humans and in society, and critical consciousness raising, the ways that we address that. The ways so far that we're addressing it with AI is we're trying the models are trying to be train it out, right? Which is difficult. And Punya had mentioned Melissa Warr's work, and what of she has noticed is as the models get more sophisticated, the bias just gets buried deeper but still exists. And so in the ways that we might work to be conscious on our own of bias, both in like humans and human social systems, I don't actually know how we have a way that we do that with humans. I don't know how we do that with machines. And I don't, so I'm curious about this, and I'm curious about folks who do research in that area, because we know that humans are imperfect, but we have long studied ways to work towards justice with humans. I don't know how we work towards justice with a machine that doesn't care about it's like doesn't know what justice is, right? It's a probability, a very fancy, although Punya and I might disagree on this, probability machine. So it doesn't have concepts of justice.
If I can just add one little thing to that, I think that one of the problems also is that we have always regarded computers and algorithms as being objective, which is one input always will give the same output. Large language models undermine that significantly. And I think that's something that we need to be thinking about when we think that we can remove bias from it, or that it's going to be a very fixed, steady thing that we can control for. I think that's an important thought.
Yeah, that is an important point. And one other quick thing that I would add is that we also have a long tradition of thinking that because a math machine did it, it is objective. And so it is that's the one we should choose, because how could math not be? Math is clean, right? It's free from our human foibles and emotions, and it's not. And there's all kind of, like Weapons of Math Destruction by Kathy O'Neill is a great example of how that's not the case. But we bring in that we believe that we are being objective. And so we're even maybe less aware of the embedded bias at massive scale of a large language model. So.
Moving on, that's first of all wonderful. But moving on to the next question, I'm actually going to jump around here and maybe combine two questions in the interest of time. We have some questions about policy implications and practical implications for schools and districts. Should there be systemic policies implemented to enhance educator capacity and mitigate the risks? And another question asks, what general advice would you give for district leaders working to implement AI in operations and classrooms to combat these biases and negative impacts, and even implications or advice that you might give to teachers, if you have any to offer?
Yeah, I mean, there are two big questions, important questions. Yeah, K-12 school administrators, they have a big responsibility right now in leading what AI use is going to look like in their schools and protecting their students. I mean, some specific things that districts could do. First, understanding the things that we're talking about, building like district leaders, understanding that a lot of these ed tech companies, they see students as dollars and not necessarily as learners, how we see them. So when you're making signing contracts for million dollar, $100,000 contracts for these tech tools, asking the right questions and making sure that the students' data is being protected. Students' data isn't going to be used to train AI without permission of the parents. I mean, there are a lot of different things embedded in it. Is it a wall garden type of technology where everything in there comes from the school or it's vetted, or is the information and the tools just coming from anywhere where then it's going to inherently have the biases that we just started talking about? Also, districts use AI for like teacher evaluations, for example. And Marie just mentioned Kathy O'Neill's book, Weapons of Math Destruction, which we talk about a lot. These evaluations, I don't know if you all remember back in like 2007 or 8 or so, when Michelle Reed was the chancellor of DC schools, and she fired hundreds of teachers because of this algorithm that was used in the teacher evaluation system just in the first year that wasn't maybe done correctly. So all that to say, districts need to be very aware of the nuance policies within how AI technologies are going to be translated into student and teacher use, where that data is going, and making sure that they have their own, like they're asking questions too, these critical questions about that we're asking here. Also, I think, a lot of district leaders, and I've been speaking with a lot of district leaders over the last few months, at least in my state, and policies are not like solid right now. A lot of district leaders they don't know where to go with policies, and they're being changed and everything. So I think when policies are being created, it needs to be a critical AI use policy, right? Like all the things that we're talking about now and in the book, the environmental impacts that we talked about, like they need to be included in the policy, right? We want students to use AI in just ways, right, that bring joy, but the policy needs to back that up too, right? And the tools that students are using and their privacy and their data protection needs to be embedded in that as well. And I'll let Marie add to that.
I'll just quickly say it's also it's the future of AI is not settled knowledge right now. So it's getting, the window for change is getting smaller, I think, right? Like we are, but to go back to Bettina Love and freedom dreaming, like I you actually have a lot of power as a school administrator. If you're purchasing for your district, if you are a superintendent, like you can dream what you want for your students, and you can set boundaries, and you can say, why do you say that this is what has to be? actually your community gets to say what has to be, right? And so work with the community to set those policies. Take a pause, take a breath, because everyone's keeps saying it's here, you got to learn, you got to do it. But like, pause, breathe. You are the professional and the expert in your field as an educator, as an educational leader. You get to decide along with that community. So do it. Let the people who see your students as dollar signs say with their piece, then you think, what do I want to do? So that is.
That's terrific, Stephanie and Marie. I think we have time maybe for one more question. And I'll share a question from a listener who trains teacher candidates, who actually has two questions, but I think one you've already touched on at length. But the first is, can you please say a bit more about what it is meant by AI being built on injustice, which we've talked about, but feel free to elaborate there. And the second is, I am still building an intro to AI for my students. A good portion of our first class is on AI usage. What are some guidelines or key things you spotlight when you do this with your students? And to end on a high note, this listener mentions that they're going to order the book right after this. And you can all see how to order the book on our website or wherever books are sold. So it's just, I may be biased as the editor, but it is just an absolutely brilliant book. So I want to highlight that as we enter the last minute or two of our conversation.
First, I just want to say thank you. As someone who's never written a book before, when people say they want to buy the book, I'm always like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. So thank you, anonymous person. That's very cool. And second, I love the idea that you're still building it and what are guidelines. And I think the idea of, for me, it's the guidelines are asking the questions about it. So Punya referenced those 5 questions, which are both we reference in our book, and the organization that I run, Civics of Technology Project, also kind of enumerates on them, pulled from Neil Postman's work. And we also have another series of questions that you can ask about it. So rather than teaching like this is how you can use AI, which I'll say this, like if you're a good conversationalist, you know how to use AI, because AI is a language model, right? You talk, you think together, you can do that. More importantly, I think, is understanding what the technology is so that you can make decisions about how and what you want to do with it. So that would be my very fast advice.
Yeah, well, that's good. Oh yeah, just making students a part of the process. You're not, teaching them, but they're learning with you. I mean, you are teaching them, but like making it a process where they feel like that they're like co-creators in this and learning about AI, which I think is actually true for most teachers and students. We're sort of like learning together, and then making connections to like their world. So as we said earlier, like their community. I think when they can make that connection, it becomes more relevant to them and they may be more interested in it. And I know we're like at 1 minute. And thank you also for buying a book as well.
All right, so Karen, I'm going to jump in with one last question, which is any recommendations that you have for people who want, apart from buying the book, buy the book. I think that's the main story we want to sell. But are there other, books, movies? I don't know. Any recommendations quickly, 30 seconds each.
Yeah, just go on the Civics of Technology website. There are a bunch of book recommendations on there, but also just content and great people. Become a member. Marie is one of the co-founders, and it is amazing. And they send you a nice newsletter every Sunday.
Oh, thanks. All right, my real quick one are, if you're interested if you have questions about the bias in AI, Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology is awesome for that. If you are curious about the environmental impacts or making AI like this idea of a cloud, like material, what it is, Kate Crawford's Atlas of AI, I think about that book like almost every day. It's so good. And then finally, if you're interested in those like the powerful pedagogies, Bettina Love's We Want to Do More Than Survive, I think is a great look for that.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Marie, for joining this conversation. Thank you to all the people who joined. We had at one point, I think we had more than 90 people. So thanks to all of you. Thank you to the Gutman Library for organizing this, and Karen and Mayan for making sure everything goes smoothly. It was great to hang out with all of you, and all the best with the book and everything else going forward. Thank you.
And thank you, Punya, for writing a forward and for facilitating this wonderful conversation. We really
Yes.
appreciate it.
Second that.
Entirely my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.